For 3 years, I believed my husband's indifference was merely work stress until I inherited a retail empire worth $250 million. He immediately installed a special assistant in our home to help me manage the burden. He never suspected that my inheritance included a state-of-the-art security system I had secretly activated. What those hidden cameras captured was not just adultery, but a conspiracy to end my life. And tonight, the entire world will watch them fall. My name is Valerie, and at 28 years old, I had mastered the art of becoming invisible while standing in the center of a ballroom. The crystal chandeliers of the Sinclair estate cast a harsh, diamond-bright light that seemed to expose every flaw, but I held my head high, encased in silk that cost more than most people earned in a year. Across the room, my mother-in-law, Brenda, watched me over the rim of her champagne flute. Her gaze was a physical weight, dissecting my posture and my smile, waiting for a mistake she could dissect later over breakfast. To her, I was merely the daughter of a decayed aristocratic line, a decorative object that had failed to bring sufficient prestige to her nouveau riche empire. Derek, my husband of 3 years, materialized at my side as the photographer circled. He was the picture of the devoted spouse, his hand resting possessively on the small of my back, his smile dazzling the lenses. The moment the flashes died down and the reporters turned away, his fingers dug into my skin, just hard enough to bruise. He leaned in, his breath warm against my ear, but his words were ice. He whispered that I looked washed out and that I should try not to look so vacant, as it made him look bad to have such a dull wife. I swallowed the lump in my throat and adjusted my expression to one of serene vacuity, exactly as he preferred. The Sinclair mansion was filled with laughter and music, yet I had never felt more isolated in the frigid marble-floored mausoleum they called a home. The atmosphere shifted abruptly when the heavy oak doors swung open to admit my Aunt Josephine. She did not just walk into a room, she conquered it. As the head of the Aurora Retail Group, she possessed the kind of power that made even the Sinclairs nervous. She marched straight to the podium, silencing the jazz band with a sharp wave of her hand. I felt a flicker of genuine warmth for the first time that evening. She caught my eye, a silent communication passing between us, before she addressed the crowd. She announced that she was stepping down, but she was not selling. Instead, she declared that the entire Aurora chain, a retail empire valued at $250 million, was being transferred immediately to her sole niece, me. The silence that followed was absolute. I watched the faces of my husband and mother-in-law transform in slow motion. The contempt that usually masked their features evaporated, replaced instantly by a naked, ravenous greed. It was grotesque. Brenda, who had ignored me all night, rushed forward, her eyes wide with feigned delight. Derek turned to me, his previous cruelty vanishing behind a mask of solicitous adoration. He squeezed my hand, this time with the desperate grip of a drowning man clutching a life raft. He immediately pitched his voice loud enough for the nearby guests to hear, proclaiming how proud he was. Then came the maneuver I should have expected. Without missing a beat, Derek declared that managing such a colossus would be far too stressful for my fragile constitution. He smiled benevolently and offered to shoulder the heavy burden of administration so I could continue my life of leisure without worry. He reached for the metaphorical reins before I had even touched them. But I remembered Aunt Josephine's stern warning from weeks ago. I pulled my hand away from his, a small but deliberate rebellion. I told him clearly that I intended to honor my aunt's wishes and manage the inheritance myself. Derek stiffened, his perfect mask slipping for a fraction of a second to reveal the fury underneath. He quickly recovered, chuckling as if I had made a charming joke, but his eyes remained cold. He conceded, but with a caveat. He insisted that if I were to take this on, I would need professional support. He told me he had already arranged for a core team of experts to assist me, specifically mentioning a brilliant management specialist named Monica. He claimed she was indispensable, a genius who would live in our staff quarters to be available around the clock. I nodded, unaware that he was inviting the wolf right into our fold. Monica arrived at our gates the very next morning, and she was nothing like the efficient, modest corporate drone Derek had described. She stepped out of a cab wearing a dress that was far too tight for a business setting, her hair styled in loose, deliberate waves. When Derek introduced us, she did not lower her eyes or offer a deferential handshake. Instead, she looked me up and down with a smirk that bordered on amusement, as if she were evaluating the competition and finding it lacking. Derek immediately installed her as my executive house manager and personal secretary, a dual title that gave her unprecedented access to every corner of my life. He insisted that for maximum efficiency, she needed to reside on the property, moving her into the guest cottage right next to the main house. It did not take long for the dynamic in my own home to shift violently. My mother-in-law, Brenda, became a permanent fixture in our drawing room, fawning over Monica's organized schedules and sharp tongue. She would loudly praise Monica's resourcefulness while shooting me pitying glances, asking why I could not manage simple tasks without becoming overwhelmed. They were rewriting reality right in front of me, painting me as the incompetent invalid and Monica as the savior of the Sinclair household. The invasion of my privacy was subtle at first, then brazen. I began to notice small, unsettling changes. My favorite vase was moved to a different shelf. Books I was reading would vanish and reappear in rooms I had not entered. Then came the scent. A heavy, cloying fragrance of gardenias began to linger in the hallways, and one evening, I smelled it distinct and sharp on the collar of Derek's shirt when he leaned in to kiss my cheek. When I asked him about it, he laughed it off, telling me I was imagining things again, that it was just the air freshener Monica had bought. I caught them exchanging glances across the dinner table, looks that held a secret language of shared amusement and contempt. Monica began to erect a wall between me and my inheritance. She intercepted calls from the Aurora Board of Directors, claiming I was indisposed or resting. She rescheduled meetings without my consent and replied to emails I had never seen. When I tried to protest, I found my energy sapped. I felt perpetually foggy, my limbs heavy and my mind slow. I assumed it was stress, but every morning, Monica would dutifully bring me a glass of green juice and my daily vitamins. I did not know then that she was swapping my supplements for sedatives. Derek used my lethargy as proof of my deteriorating mental state, whispering to the staff that the pressure of the inheritance was causing me to break down. The trap snapped shut during a dinner service that felt more like an interrogation. Derek and Brenda sat on either side of me, sliding a stack of legal documents across the mahogany table. They were power of attorney forms, granting Derek temporary control over the Aurora chain until I recovered. Derek's voice was soothing, almost hypnotic, telling me it was for my own good. I felt the pen in my hand, heavy as lead, and saw the triumph in Brenda's eyes. Panic surged through the fog in my brain. I knew I could not sign, but I could not argue. I feigned a spasm of clumsiness, sweeping my arm out and knocking a full pitcher of ice water all over the documents. The ink bled instantly, ruining the papers. Derek slammed his fist on the table, his mask of concern shattering into pure rage, but I apologized profusely, playing the confused, clumsy wife to perfection, using the excuse of needing fresh air to calm my nerves. I managed to slip away the next afternoon. I met Aunt Josephine at a small, nondescript cafe far from the socialite circuit. I told her everything, my voice trembling as I described the gaslighting, the isolation, and the suspicion that I was being drugged. I expected her to be shocked, but she simply nodded, her expression grim. She reached across the table and gripped my hand. She told me that she had anticipated the Sinclairs might try to consume me. That was why, she explained. The Aurora chain was not just a business. The flagship stores and, crucially, the very mansion I lived in, which had been a company asset before Derek convinced me to move in, were rigged. She revealed that years ago. She had installed the eye, a military-grade hidden surveillance system embedded in the fire sensors and the frames of the artwork. I was not helpless. I was living inside a recording studio, and I had the master key. That night, locked inside the guest bedroom where I had been relegated ostensibly for my recovery, I became a ghost in my own home. Following the precise instructions given to me by Marcus, my aunt's head of security, I powered on the nondescript black tablet he had slipped into my purse. My hands did not tremble as I entered the 64-character encryption key. The screen flickered once before resolving into a grid of high-definition live feeds. The hidden cameras, microscopically integrated into the smoke detectors and the gilded frames of the oil paintings, provided a terrifyingly clear view of the entire estate. I sat in the dark, the blue light of the screen illuminating my face, and watched the people who claimed to love me peel off their masks. I tapped the feed labeled Living Room. The audio quality was impeccable, picking up the clinking of ice against crystal. My mother-in-law, Brenda, was lounging on the sofa, her feet propped up on the antique coffee table. Monica sat opposite her, not with the demeanor of an employee, but with the arrogance of a conqueror. I listened as Brenda threw her head back and laughed, calling me a stupid cash cow who was finally ready for the slaughter. They toasted to their brilliance, discussing the specific private sanitarium where they planned to commit me once Derek secured the permanent power of attorney. Hearing them casually plan my imprisonment should have broken me, but instead, it calcified my resolve. I was no longer a wife or a daughter-in-law. I was an archivist of their crimes. I switched the view to Derek's home office. The image that filled the screen was a grotesque parody of intimacy. Derek and Monica were entangled on the heavy oak desk, scattering paperwork onto the floor. They were heedless of the framed wedding photograph that sat inches away from them, face down. I watched with a detached, clinical coldness as they finished, but what followed was far more damning than the infidelity. Derek pulled up a spreadsheet on his laptop, turning the screen so Monica could see. The microphone in the ceiling captured every word of their scheme. They were setting up shell companies under Monica's various aliases to invoice Aurora for non-existent logistics services. They planned to drain the operating capital within 6 months, leaving the company a hollow shell before declaring bankruptcy. Then came the confession that turned my blood to ice. Derek reached into his pocket and pulled out a familiar orange prescription bottle. He bragged to Monica that he had successfully swapped my anxiety medication for a potent antipsychotic mixed with heavy sedatives. He laughed as he described how the drugs were designed to induce confusion, memory loss, and even mild hallucinations. He said it was the perfect cover, as my erratic behavior would make the judge sign the committal papers without a second thought. Monica kissed him, calling him a genius, and told him to increase the dosage starting tomorrow to speed up the process. I spent the next 3 hours meticulously saving every clip. I backed up the data to 3 separate encrypted cloud servers and transferred a physical copy to a microdrive that I taped inside the hollow leg of my vanity table. I sent a priority data packet to my personal lawyer with instructions to hold it in a dead man's switch protocol. I knew I could end it right then. I could call the police and have them arrested for the drugs alone. But that was not enough. I wanted them to lose everything, not just their freedom. To do that, I had to continue the performance. I crept into the bathroom and found the tampered pill bottle. I emptied the toxic capsules into the toilet and replaced them with harmless sugar pills I had crushed and refilled into the casings. The next morning, I swallowed the fake medicine in front of Derek. Then, I orchestrated my descent. I deliberately walked into a doorframe, letting my coffee cup shatter on the floor. I slurred my words, calling Derek by his father's name and asking about events that had happened years ago. I saw the gleam of triumph in his eyes as he guided me back to bed, whispering false comforts. He thought he was watching his wife fade away, but he was actually watching a performance that would eventually seal his doom. The following morning, while Derek believed I was at a mandated therapy session, I was actually slipping into the freight elevator of the Aurora headquarters. I met with our chief financial officer, a man whose loyalty to my aunt was absolute, in a soundproofed conference room on the 45th floor. Together, We dissected the financial bleeding. The records showed that in just 3 weeks, Derek had authorized purchasing contracts worth $40 million. The vendors were all shell companies with addresses that traced back to empty lots in industrial parks. He was not just managing the business, he was looting it with terrifying speed. We dug deeper into the personnel files and found the damage was not just financial. Monica, utilizing her vague title of executive assistant, had been granted administrative override privileges in the human resources database by Derek. She had systematically terminated 15 senior managers, people who had built this company alongside my aunt for decades, and replaced them with unqualified individuals who all shared a suspicious connection to Derek's extended family. It was a corporate coup in real time. I authorized the head of our IT security division to install a mirror on Derek and Monica's internal communications, ensuring that every email, every instant message, and every keystroke they made was forwarded directly to my encrypted server. When I returned home, I played my most dangerous card yet. I summoned Derek to the study, feigning a trembling exhaustion. I told him I could no longer handle the pressure and that he was right about everything. I placed a document on the desk, a heavy, bonded paper that looked identical to the sweeping power of attorney he had tried to force on me earlier. His eyes lit up with predatory hunger as he watched me sign my name. He did not notice that the document was drafted on letterhead from a defunct subsidiary and contained a clause in the fine print that nullified the agreement if not countersigned by a notary I had deliberately not invited. He snatched the paper away before the ink was dry, practically vibrating with triumph. He believed he had won the kingdom. Thinking I was safely sedated in my room that afternoon, Derek and Monica threw themselves a premature victory party by the pool. My tablet captured them uncorking a bottle of vintage Cabernet from Aunt Josephine's private cellar, a bottle worth $5,000 that was meant for a milestone anniversary they clearly did not respect. They drank straight from the bottle, laughing as the red wine dripped onto the pristine white limestone deck. Then, the surveillance feed switched to the master bedroom. I watched in silent fury as my mother-in-law, Brenda, rifled through my jewelry armoire. She bypassed the costume pieces and selected a diamond and sapphire choker that had belonged to my grandmother. She walked out to the patio and fastened it around Monica's neck. The audio picked up her voice clearly as she told Monica that such jewels were wasted on a sick woman like me, and that Monica was the only one with the fire to be the true mistress of this house. Monica preened, stroking the diamonds that were rightfully mine, looking at her reflection in the sliding glass door. Later that day, the cameras recorded an even uglier scene. Monica, drunk on power and stolen wine, cornered our head housekeeper in the kitchen. She threw a plate of food on the floor because she claimed it was not hot enough and forced the elderly woman to clean it up on her hands and knees while she filmed it on her phone, laughing cruelly. I saved the footage, adding it to the mounting pile of evidence. My rage was a cold, hard knot in my chest, but I knew the time for release was close. Aunt Josephine sent word that the Aurora Summit Gala was scheduled for the following Saturday. Derek was already preparing his speech to announce his total control over the company, unaware that he was walking into a public execution, not a coronation. The arrogance of the wicked is often their most fatal flaw, and watching Derek and Monica prepare for the Aurora Summit Gala was like watching two children playing with a loaded gun. Derek did not even bother to hide the paper trail anymore. He used the corporate credit card to purchase a $15,000 emerald silk gown for Monica, listing it in the expense report as office supplies. He intended to introduce her as the new Chief Operations Officer, a title she was as qualified for as she was for sainthood. Meanwhile, my wardrobe for the evening was curated with equal care, but with a very different objective. Derek went through my closet and pulled out a drab, gray dress I had not worn in 5 years, one that was slightly too large and missing a button on the cuff. He insisted I wear it, telling me that anything flashier would only draw attention to my condition. He wanted me to look like a ghost, a pale, disheveled shadow standing next to Monica's vibrant, expensive brilliance. He wanted the world to see a broken woman who needed to be relieved of her burden so the board would gratefully hand the reins to him. Then came the moment that nearly made me break character. Monica, emboldened by her new dresses and the diamonds Brenda had already stolen for her, demanded the Aurora pearls. This necklace was not just jewelry. It was the symbol of the matriarch of our family, worn by every woman who had led the company for 3 generations. She claimed she needed it to look the part of a leader. I went to my safe, shielding the combination with my body, and retrieved a high-quality replica I kept for travel. I handed the plastic beads to her with trembling hands, feigning defeat. She snatched them, fastening the fake pearls around her neck and preening in the mirror, completely unaware that the real South Sea pearls, worth $250,000, were sitting securely in a velvet box behind the steel door I had just locked. It was a perfect metaphor for her entire existence, a cheap imitation draped in stolen glory. While Monica played dress-up, Brenda was busy poisoning the well. My surveillance feeds caught her on the phone with the city's elite, whispering in hushed, tragic tones about my rapid mental decline. She told anyone who would listen that it was a mercy that Derek was taking over, as I had become a danger to myself and the legacy. She was practically selling tickets to my downfall. Derek, for his part, spent hours in front of the mirror practicing his speech. I watched him rehearse the pauses, the mournful look he would cast in my direction, and the humble acceptance of the CEO position. He was scripting a tragedy where he was the hero, unaware that I had already rewritten the ending. While they were busy with their costumes and lies, I was finalizing the technical aspects of their destruction. I used a burner phone to contact the head of the audio-visual team at the venue, a man whose daughter's college tuition I had quietly paid for last year. We went over the lighting cues and the video feed override protocols. I also sent out a series of very specific invitations. I ensured that the front row would not just be filled with shareholders, but also with 2 senior detectives from the Economic Crimes Unit and 3 investigative journalists known for destroying corrupt executives. The night before the gala, the cameras captured the final piece of evidence I needed to harden my heart completely. Derek and Monica were in the library, drinking brandy. They were not discussing business strategies or the future of the company. They were discussing divorce. Derek laughed as he told her that once the board ratified his position the next night, he would have me declared incompetent and institutionalized within 48 hours. He planned to divorce me in absentia, leaving me to rot in a state facility while they lived in my house and spent my fortune. They clinked their glasses, celebrating a future that would never come. The grand ballroom of the saint. Regis was suffocatingly opulent, filled to the brim with over 400 of the city's most influential partners, shareholders, and media vultures. The air smelled of expensive perfume and anticipation. At the center of it all stood Derek and Monica, basking in the attention like royalty holding court. Monica was radiating triumph, the replica pearls I had given her gleaming dull and plastic under the chandeliers, though to the untrained eye, they looked like the real scepter of the Aurora matriarch. She clung to Derek's arm, accepting congratulations on her promotion with a false modesty that made my stomach turn. They looked like the perfect power couple, completely secure in the belief that the real owner of the company was currently sobbing into a pillow in a locked room 10 miles away. I waited until everyone was seated and the first course was being served before I made my move. When the heavy double doors swung open, I did not shuffle in wearing the moth-eaten, oversized gray dress Derek had selected for me. Instead, I strode into the room wearing a custom-designed crimson gown that fit like a second skin, a structured piece of architectural fashion that screamed power and vitality. My hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon, and my makeup was flawless. I did not look like a woman on the verge of a mental breakdown. I looked like an empress returning to claim her throne. The effect was instantaneous. The hum of conversation died out, replaced by a silence so heavy it felt physical. I saw the color drain from Derek's face as if he had seen a ghost. Brenda, who had ignored me all night, dropped her fork, the silver clattering loudly against the china. They stared at me, their carefully constructed narrative of my insanity crumbling with every confident step I took in my 6-inch heels. I walked straight down the center aisle, my head held high, meeting the gaze of the board members who had been told I was too fragile to leave my bed. Derek recovered first, his survival instinct kicking in. He sprinted toward me, meeting me halfway to the stage. He grabbed my elbow with a grip that was painful, his fingernails digging into my flesh through the silk. He leaned in close, his voice a low, venomous hiss, telling me that I was making a scene and that he was going to drag me out to the car immediately. He tried to steer me toward the side exit, using his body to shield me from the cameras. But I was done being steered. I stopped dead, planted my feet, and ripped my arm out of his grasp with enough force to make him stumble back. I did not whisper. I looked him dead in the eye and walked past him as if he were nothing more than a piece of furniture. Monica, seeing her lover fail, tried to intervene. She stepped to the bottom of the stairs leading to the stage, blocking my path with her arms crossed, assuming her role as the protective gatekeeper. She opened her mouth to tell the crowd that I was unwell, but before she could get a word out, 2 of Aunt Josephine's personal bodyguards materialized from the shadows. They did not speak, they simply stepped in front of her, forming a human wall of muscle. One of them nudged her aside with a shoulder, not violently, but with enough dismissive force that she nearly tripped over her own train. I ascended the stairs alone and took the microphone from the stand. The feedback whined for a split second before I silenced the room with a smile that did not reach my eyes. I looked out at the sea of faces, spotting the confused shareholders and the eager journalists. I spoke clearly, my voice steady and commanding. I announced that before we proceeded with the business of the evening, I had a special gift to present, a tribute to the extraordinary dedication and unique management style of my husband and his assistant. I raised my hand, and on my cue, the house lights plunged the ballroom into darkness. A collective gasp ran through the crowd. All eyes were drawn to the massive 20-foot LED screen suspended behind me. In the dark, I could see Derek near the front, panic finally setting in. He was frantically making a cutting motion across his throat, signaling the audio-visual technician to kill the feed. But the technician, a man whose loyalty I had purchased with kindness and tuition fees days ago, sat motionless in the booth, his arms crossed over his chest. Derek looked back at me, his eyes wide with a terror that was 3 years overdue, just as the screen flickered to life. The massive LED screen behind me did not play the sentimental montage of company milestones that Derek had carefully curated. Instead, stark, brutal white text appeared against a black background, spelling out a title that made the air in the room drop 10 degrees. The truth about in-home corporate governance. Before the audience could even process the headline, the video began to play with crystal-clear audio that boomed through the state-of-the-art sound system I had personally approved. The first clip was shot from the hidden camera in the study. It showed Derek and Monica sitting at my desk, drinking my aunt's wine. Derek's voice was amplified to a deafening volume as he laughed and referred to the senior shareholders sitting in the front row as a bunch of senile old donkeys who were too blind to see he was bleeding them dry. He detailed his plan to siphon off 40% of the operating capital into his offshore accounts before the end of the fiscal quarter. The reaction in the ballroom was instantaneous and violent. A collective gasp swept through the room, followed immediately by the sound of chairs scraping against the floor as the board members, red-faced with fury, rose to their feet. I did not give them time to recover. The scene cut sharply to the kitchen. The high-definition lens captured every grain of the powder Monica was grinding into a fine dust. She poured the substance into my evening tea, stirring it with a sinister focus. Her voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd, clear and malicious, as she whispered to the empty room that I should drink up and die early so she could finally take my place. The horror in the room was palpable. Hands flew to mouths, and I saw several guests turn away in disgust. Then came the footage of Brenda. She was sitting in my living room, her face twisted in ugly determination as she instructed her son on how to forge the signatures on the psychiatric committal papers. She explicitly stated that they needed to lock me away in the cheapest facility possible to save money for their renovations. The camera then cut to a live feed of Brenda at her table. She looked up at the giant screen, seeing her own monstrous words replayed for the elite society she so desperately wanted to impress. The color drained from her face so completely that she looked like a corpse. Her eyes rolled back, and she slumped sideways in her chair, fainting dead away in a heap of taffeta and shame. But no one moved to help her. The final blow was the most personal and the most devastating. The screen displayed the footage from the office desk, the very spot where my wedding photo stood. It showed Derek and Monica in the throes of passion, knocking my picture face down. But it was the audio that destroyed them. Between breaths, they were mocking me, laughing about how pathetic and frumpy I looked in the old clothes they forced me to wear, calling me a sexless bore who deserved to be discarded. Monica could not take it anymore. She let out a shriek that sounded more animal than human. She lunged toward the stage, her face contorted with madness, intending to rip the microphone from my hand. But in her blind panic, she missed the first step. She tripped violently, her chest slamming against the edge of the stage. The impact snapped the string of the pearl necklace she was wearing. Time seemed to slow down as the beads scattered. They did not make the heavy, dull thud of genuine South Sea pearls. Instead, they made the hollow, skittering click-clack of cheap plastic bouncing across the hardwood floor. Hundreds of plastic beads rolled toward the feet of the press, a physical manifestation of her fraudulence. I stood perfectly still next to the screen, untouched by the chaos swirling around me. I looked down at Derek. He was standing at the foot of the stage, shaking uncontrollably, sweat soaking through his tuxedo shirt until it was transparent. He looked up at me, his eyes begging for a mercy that he would never receive. I simply looked back, my expression as cold and impenetrable as the lens of a camera, watching him drown in the truth. The heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom burst open with a resounding crash that silenced the remaining murmurs. A squad of federal agents and uniformed officers marched in, their badges gleaming under the chandeliers like shields of justice. It was a sight that usually signaled the end of a party, but for me, it was the true beginning of the celebration. I leaned into the microphone, my voice steady and amplified to fill every corner of the room. I informed everyone that at 8 o'clock that morning, a courier had delivered a complete digital dossier to the district attorney's office containing terabytes of video evidence proving embezzlement, corporate fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. Derek, realizing the walls had finally closed in, did exactly what I expected a coward to do. He scrambled backward, nearly tripping over his own feet, and pointed a shaking finger at Monica, who was still on the floor amidst her scattered plastic beads. He screamed that it was all her idea, that she had seduced him and twisted his mind, and that he was merely a victim of her manipulation. It was a pathetic display, but it triggered the final explosion. Monica, hearing the man she had ruined herself for throw her to the wolves, let out a feral screech. She launched herself at him, her nails raking down his face, screaming that he was a liar and a thief. They rolled on the floor in a tangle of tuxedo wool and torn silk, a humiliating spectacle captured by every camera in the room. The police wasted no time. They pulled the two of them apart, forcing their hands behind their backs with professional roughness. The sharp click of the handcuffs was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. As they were hauled to their feet and marched out of the ballroom, the silence broke. The crowd began to boo, a low rumble that grew into a roar of condemnation. The photographers swarmed them, the blinding flashes illuminating Derek's bleeding face and Monica's ruined makeup in harsh, stroboscopic bursts. They were dragged out like common criminals, stripping away every shred of dignity they had tried to steal from me. In the commotion, my mother-in-law, Brenda, had regained consciousness and was attempting to crab walk inconspicuously toward the service exit, trying to blend in with the catering staff. She did not make it far. Two of the venue's security team, acting on my prior instructions, stepped in her path. I pointed to her from the stage and announced that she was an accessory to the attempted poisoning and was currently in possession of stolen property. The diamond ring on her left hand, which she had been flaunting all evening, was pulled from my private safe 2 days ago. She shrieked as the officers took her into custody, adding her voice to the chorus of the damned as she was led away to join her son. With the refuse taken out, I turned back to the stunned audience. I declared that effective immediately. Every single individual appointed by Derek Sinclair to the Aurora staff was terminated for cause. I then read a list of names, the loyal managers and directors who had been wrongfully fired, and announced their immediate reinstatement with full back pay and a 20% bonus for their trouble. The shock in the room turned into admiration. The shareholders, realizing their investments had just been saved from a gang of thieves, erupted into thunderous applause. It was not polite clapping. It was a standing ovation of relief and respect. The final moment of the night belonged to family. Aunt Josephine, looking regal in deep purple velvet, ascended the stairs to join me. She carried a small, worn velvet box. She opened it to reveal the true Aurora pearls, their luster deep and warm, contrasting sharply with the cheap plastic debris still littering the floor below. She fastened the necklace around my throat, the cool weight of the gems settling against my skin. She turned me to face the crowd and raised my hand in hers, signaling to the world that the Queen had not just returned. She had conquered. The wheels of justice, often criticized for turning slowly, spun with terrifying speed when greased by terabytes of high-definition video evidence. The criminal trials and my divorce proceedings were not so much legal battles as they were administrative formalities. The defense attorneys for Derek and Monica looked defeated before they even entered the courtroom, knowing that any attempt to argue against the footage of their clients plotting murder would only infuriate the jury. There was no plea deal offered, and the gavel came down with a finality that echoed the slamming of a prison door. Derek was sentenced to 15 years in a maximum security federal facility for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy to commit bodily harm. The judge, clearly disgusted by the betrayal of trust, ensured that the divorce settlement was equally punitive, citing the egregious violation of our marital contract. The court ruled that Derek had forfeited any claim to marital assets. He walked out of that courtroom with absolutely nothing, stripped of his title, his money, and his freedom. He looked back at me one last time as the marshals led him away, searching for a shred of pity in my eyes, but he found only a mirror reflecting his own ruin. Monica fared no better. She received a sentence of 10 years. During the investigation, her mysterious background unraveled completely. It turned out that Monica was merely the latest in a string of aliases she had used to con wealthy families across the country. She was a professional parasite, but her career ended the moment she underestimated me. Her past caught up with her, adding charges of identity theft and prior fraud to her current sentence. She was dragged away screaming, not about her innocence, but about how unfair it was that her beauty was going to waste behind bars. My mother-in-law, Brenda, managed to escape a prison cell, but she entered a different kind of hell. To pay the restitution for the theft of my jewelry and the hefty fines levied by the court for her complicity, she was forced to liquidate her entire estate. She sold her beloved home, her car, and every last piece of furniture. Today, the woman who once looked down on me for my family's faded fortune lives in a state-subsidized nursing home on the outskirts of the city. It is a bleak, gray facility where the staff does not care about her social standing, and the meals are served on plastic trays. It is a lonely, sterile end for a woman whose heart was always too cold for a real home. I wasted no time in purging my own life of their lingering stench. I sold the Sinclair mansion, the stage of my trauma, to a developer who planned to bulldoze it. I did not take a single item from that house with me. Instead, I purchased a penthouse in Manhattan with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. It is a space of light, glass, and sharp angles, with nowhere for shadows to hide. With the funds recovered from Derek's hidden offshore accounts, I established a charitable foundation dedicated to providing legal aid and safe housing for women escaping domestic violence and psychological manipulation. Every dollar Derek stole to hurt me is now being used to save others from men just like him. It felt like the perfect transmutation of his greed into grace. The media, hungry for a hero, painted me as an icon of resilience and intelligence. The publicity caused the revenue of the Aurora chain to skyrocket by 40% in the first quarter alone. I embraced the role, shedding the skin of the timid, submissive wife. I cut my hair into a sharp, angular bob and traded my soft pastels for tailored suits in black and crimson. I became the woman I was always meant to be: sharp, decisive, and untouchable, far away from my penthouse, in the cold, concrete belly of the prison system. Derek is learning the true meaning of powerlessness. Reports from my lawyer tell me that he is not doing well. He is bullied by other inmates, stripped of his arrogance, and reduced to a weeping mess in his bunk at night. He cries out apologies to the dark, begging for a forgiveness that will never come. But his tears are useless currency now. The world has moved on, and I have risen above the wreckage, leaving him to rot in the rubble he created. It has been exactly 1 year since the night the lights went out at the St. Regis, and the world looks very different from the head of the boardroom table. I sat in the high-backed leather chair at the Aurora headquarters, listening to the quarterly reports. The room was filled with seasoned executives, men and women who now looked at me not with suspicion, but with absolute deference. I did not have to raise my voice or demand attention. I simply spoke, and they listened. We had just closed the most profitable fiscal year in the company's history, and as I adjourned the meeting, the respect in the room was palpable. I was no longer the fragile heiress. I was the architect of our future. Later that afternoon, I was being driven to my aunt's estate for a private celebration. The city was moving in a blur of gray and steel outside the tinted windows of my town car until we came to a stop at a long red light near the highway underpass. I looked out idly, watching a group of inmates in bright orange jumpsuits performing community service, clearing debris from the side of the road. Then, I saw him. Derek looked older, his face gaunt and lined with the stress of survival in a place where his charm held no currency. He was spearing trash with a pointed stick, his movements sluggish and defeated. For a fleeting second, he looked up. Through the glass, our eyes met. I saw the shock register on his face, followed by a naked, desperate hunger. He took a step forward, perhaps instinctively reaching out for the life he had thrown away, but the guard barked an order at him, forcing him back into line. I did not feel the rush of anger I expected, nor did I feel the ugly satisfaction of gloating. I just felt a profound lightness, as if a heavy coat had finally been lifted from my shoulders. I pressed the button on the door, and the black privacy glass slid up smoothly, erasing him from my view and sealing the separation between our worlds forever. As the car pulled away, my phone buzzed against the leather seat. It was a message from Julian, a man I had recently started working with on a philanthropic venture. The text was simple and respectful, asking if I would like to join him for dinner to discuss our project, adding that he valued my insight on the matter. It was a stark contrast to the man I had just left on the roadside, a man who had only ever wanted to silence me. I typed a quick reply accepting the invitation, a small smile playing on my lips. I found Aunt Josephine in the solarium, pouring 2 glasses of vintage champagne. We did not need to say much. The clinking of crystal was a toast to more than just profits. It was a toast to survival, to the strength of blood, and to the resilience of women who refuse to be broken. We drank to the prosperity of the Sinclair line, which was finally free of the parasites that had tried to bleed it dry. That evening, I stood alone on the rooftop terrace of the Aurora building, the wind whipping through my hair. The city of New York sprawled out beneath me, a grid of glittering lights that looked like spilled diamonds on black velvet. I reached up and touched the cool, smooth surface of the South Sea pearls around my neck. They were heavy, grounding, and real. I realized then that hatred is a chain that binds you to your enemy, and I had finally broken mine. The best revenge is not to destroy those who hurt you, but to live a life so vibrant, so successful, and so full of joy that they become irrelevant footnotes in your biography. I turned my back on the city, my shadow stretching long and proud behind me, and walked through the glass doors, ready for a new chapter written entirely on my own terms. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below, sharing your location and your thoughts on Valerie's journey. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more people.